Our next guest here on Crunch Chronicles, a defenseman who spent a couple of seasons in Syracuse back in the Columbus Blue Jacket affiliation days for the Crunch. Spent 3 seasons in Syracuse back in the mid-2000s. It is Marc Methot who joins us here today. Marc, welcome to Crunch Chronicles. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Lukas. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. It's been a while since we've, seen you here in Syracuse, of course. So I guess we'll just start off, catch us up on, where you are currently and what you've got going on in your world these days.
Yeah, well, retired now. My last season would have been in 2018, I believe. If I might be wrong there, but a knee injury pushed me out. So I took about a year to kind of figure out what I wanted to do next, and inevitably landed into a podcast, and then that kind of segued into getting onto the broadcast team with TSN. So I do a lot of coverage now at the NHL level with the Ottawa Senators, intermission stuff, panel work. And I'm enjoying it. It's fun. It kind of gives me something to look forward to every odd day here and there. But between that and my young kids, I've got a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old now, and my son is the oldest. He's busy with hockey, so I'm kind of navigating through that world now. I know in upstate New York, there's still a ton of hockey over there too, so a lot of parents can relate. I think the challenge now is kind of towing the line between keeping up with the Joneses and knowing how much hockey might be too much for your young one. And then on the other hand, trying to keep up and getting him playing at a high level. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm kind of wading into the waters and figuring things out.
Yeah, how much are you enjoying that though? To see him, playing the game now. He's still 6 years old, which is great. But how much are you enjoying it from your perspective?
Oh man, it's hard. It's hard. And I'm not, I'm not a crazy parent. I'm not screaming in the stands or giving them a hard time on the car ride home. I keep it very positive. But being a former player, it's difficult because, you expect them to do perhaps at times what you want them to do, but they're 6. So there's that little age barrier and maturity thing going on. So I have to rein myself in once in a while, but I am really enjoying it. It's a blast, and not worrying about taking hits anymore. I can just kind of watch and be a fan in the stands. It's a pretty cool experience.
Are you gonna end up coaching him at some point, you think, or are you just gonna stay in the stands and enjoy it from that perspective?
So I tried the coaching thing
Okay.
last year, and boy, it requires a lot of patience. So I think I'm going to wait a little bit. I've separated myself from that until maybe he gets to an age where they can actually do what I want them to do on the ice. I don't think having a former NHL player helps a whole lot when they're 5 and 6. That really comes into play when I can actually show them tricks and stuff that applies in games, maybe when they get closer to 10. So I'm buying time now, just focusing about the practices, the extra stuff, and I let the other coaches do all the work.
That's fair. That seems like a
Yeah.
good approach to take, at least for now. And then you mentioned it too. You're on the broadcast side now as well. You said you've enjoying it. What do you like about? Obviously you're still now involved in the game because of that. What do you like about being on the broadcast side?
It was a challenge at first because, all of a sudden you're on the side where you're critiquing players and you're being critical of play and you're breaking things down. And so I think that the first year or two when I started, that was especially difficult because there were still a ton of players that I was very familiar with, that I'd been playing with or against. So it felt kind of dirty almost being on this side, on the dark side, being hypercritical of players. Now there's been a huge shift. The league's really young now. So just for example, like on the Ottawa Senators, I mean, there's not one player I played with in my time there back in 2017. So it's kind of nice. Now I can be a little bit more, not ruthless, but I can be more transparent, not hold myself back too much, all the while keeping things pretty respectful. But I think for me, that was the biggest challenge initially. And then of course, just dealing with live TV and compressing all your thoughts into like a 1.5-minute clip with, your producer in your ear the whole time, warning you about the time crunch and all that. So, but I got a crash course. I learned it pretty quickly, and I'm not perfect, but I'm enjoying it, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, it's great, and like we said, it keeps you involved in the game now. You've been
Correct.
retired for a couple of years. We know that it's always a tough transition, right? When you've been playing for so long, you've got that
Yeah.
that regular schedule for so many years. How much of a transition was it for you? And like you said, you had to retire mainly due to injury. How difficult was it, at the start to after your playing days?
Yeah, I'm happy you brought that up. This applies to a lot of people, not just necessarily hockey players or athletes for that matter. Feel like everyday people, when retirement is looming, yes, we're all excited for it. But I mean, for me, it was incredibly difficult. I think I was 35, pushed out to it due to injury. That was a challenge in itself. So, I had to, it was hard on the household. I mean, I think, you're sitting around trying to figure out what you're going to do next. And everybody talks about it. I think, like when you're in the moment, when you're playing, you get the warning signs. People kind of bring it up occasionally, how you should have a fallback plan, have something to do when you're done playing. But of course, it's such an incredibly intense line of work that you can't really afford to put that much mental bandwidth into something else. You just want to remain hyper focused on your job, because the timeline for a professional athlete is very short.
Yeah.
So I think I had a rude awakening when the retirement came, and you mentioned due to injury. I think that made it much more difficult for me. I wasn't able to kind of leave on my own terms. I was pushed out, which created a little resentment as well, because I always took great pride in staying in great shape and taking care of my body. But genetics combined with wear and tear is undefeated, and you can't fight back that much on it. Certainly not with cartilage. So that's the hand I was dealt. I had to deal with it, and I'm very lucky that I was able to get on with TSN. That was a blessing for me, and it's allowed me to kind of stay somewhat sane in the last 4 or 5 years.
Was that something? I know you said, as a player, you are hyper focused on what you've got going on in terms of all the stuff related to being an athlete, a professional athlete. Was broadcasting something you ever had thought about though, or is that just kind of fell in, once you had retired and it came about?
There were those warning signs early on. I think, particularly when I got traded to Ottawa, so I started dealing with bigger media scrums in the dressing rooms, playing in Canada and all that. And I think, so every once in a while, I do an interview, and maybe the reporter or a journalist would mention, "Hey, man, like you're pretty good at this. Maybe, have you considered getting into that when you're done playing?" And I think that always kind of planted a seed for me. It was sort of always at the back of my mind that I might want to get into it. So I've always been somewhat comfortable in front of the camera. Of course, the live TV aspect, as I mentioned earlier, is a different animal. But no, it's your comfort level. You can always tell the difference between retired players, guys that are comfortable on camera, and guys that are maybe forcing it or pushing it a little bit because they need to or want to or whatever. But it always came very naturally to me. I don't know why or where that came from, but it just is what it is. I don't know that I knew that when I was playing for Syracuse, for example, but it sort of developed over the years, getting reps in, and this is where I'm at now.
Yeah, well, and we're excited that it's going so well for you there, and continued success, of course, for all of that. We'll circle back on all that maybe a little bit at the end as well, but shift our focus now to your time with the Crunch, 3 years
Yeah.
back, right at the start of your pro career, of course, coming in with the Blue Jackets organization. I guess before we dive into some of the specifics, just your thoughts on your 3 years that you spent with the Crunch.
I have this discussion all the time with, for one in particular, Derek Brassard, who didn't play quite as much as I did down in Syracuse, obviously first round pick to Columbus, but we always talk about how much we enjoyed our days there. Like I think back, I could not have thought of a better scenario for me. I mean, the city was great. The organization was great. We had great ownership, always bringing in lots of tough guys and free agents, and between that and just being able to afford living downtown in that area, it's beautiful. At least my time spent there, we all lived in certain buildings. For a while, we were behind Dinosaur Barbecue. I'm not even sure if that's still there anymore, but it was off a road called, I believe, Willow. There was a little 4-story condo complex there, and half the team lived in that building, and it was unbelievable. It was like a glorified dorm. So getting to the rink was easy. It was convenient. We drew great crowds. I really believe it's probably one of the better places to play in the American League. And, you get the ton of snow, so you really feel like you're in a hockey city. And, we had some great teams there. I mean, we didn't win a championship, but we were always very competitive, had a couple great playoff rounds. And between that and all the theatrics surrounding those groups that I played with, I mean, I think we might have had one of the toughest teams between, I know I'm going to name drop and half the audience listening probably doesn't remember, but we had guys like Zenon Konopka, Brandon Sugden, Derek Dorsett, Tom Sestito. I know I'm missing players here, but it was John Morasti. We always had this ridiculous group of toughness. So players like myself played that much bigger. And it was a lot more fun being around that group as a result. And I mean, I genuinely mean this when I say it. I miss my time there. obviously the goal when you're playing in the American League is just to graduate on and make it to the NHL, at least for a lot of the players that are down there. But it was a great development league for me coming out of junior and learning to live on my own, become an adult. And really and again, credit to coaches like Gary Agnew, who I had at the time when I was there. Ross Yates was there. Um, really had some great relationships with them, and I miss it to death.
Yeah, and I can assure you, all of those names you name dropped, everyone here, at least in Syracuse, remembers them
Oh, good.
very fondly. It's funny, we had Zenon Konopka on here a couple of years ago on the podcast, and he's talking about the year, his first year in the organization, and you mentioned how tough that team was, and
Yeah.
he's like, we got all the names you mentioned. But then you've got the Derek Brassards willing to drop the gloves too, just because everyone was following suit
Yeah.
with that group, and just and how much you all loved each other, obviously, and how tight the group was, and again how I think he said you'd pack the barn for warmups just with some of the stuff going on pregame as well. But just what a wild group it was for especially your last year here, but just overall.
Yeah, no, I mean, you said it. Like even before warmups, or rather during warmups, we had guys were rifling pucks off the glass into the opponent's zone. This is like mid warmup. This is something I've never seen before. Zenon Konopka going to the boards and spraying himself with water, then squirting all the fans, and the fans just loving it. And of course, some of the crazy fans we had in that building. I remember there was a couple guys dressed as the Hanson
Oh
brothers
yeah.
that would do the half lap around the boards. Pretty sure there was a man wearing like a wolf pelt over his head at some point in the stands. I mean, it was wild. But I think that's what made it so great. I mean, we forget sometimes that sport in general is entertainment, right? It's not real life. So it was very much larger than life in that building. And yeah, and I think a lot of that it was impacted by obviously with the owners, and then bringing in good leaders. I mean, a guy like Zenon Konopka, for as wild and crazy as he could be at times, was a great leader to have in that room, and a powerful voice, wasn't shy to speak his mind. And we all kind of built off that. And then you had the Jamie pushers as well. Guys like Jamie, who was my captain and on defense at the time, a Stanley Cup winner, just seemingly playing in the American League because he enjoyed the game so much. I know he had a place somewhere outside of Syracuse, up in upstate there somewhere, but we had great characters, great players around us all the time. So it was great for the development. And yeah, I mean, again, between having team dinners, going to the Carousel Mall at the time, which wasn't what it is now, of course. I know it's blown up into some huge mall, but those are the little things that we remember. And then going up on a campus, catching a basketball game, everything was right there at our fingertips. And so I think that's what really kind of drew us in. And again, fans included, why we enjoyed playing there so much. We always had great support. The place was packed. So you were never lacking motivation. As you can tell, I could go on and on. It was a great experience.
Yeah, and there's a reason why the Crunch are in their 30th season now this year, one of the longest running teams in the AHL. Well, let's dive back, I guess, to year one for you, 05-06, your rookie season. You come out of junior, like you said, out of the OHL with the London Knights. First pro season, you said it too. You're on your own. You're living on your own for the first time. What do you remember from that first experience of pro hockey, first year in Syracuse?
Yeah, we were living. So that was the only year I had a roommate, and never again after that. And that had nothing to do with my roommate.
Just gonna say, I hope it wasn't because of whoever you're living with.
No, I was living with Jeff Platt, and Platt was another very good player for us when we were down there, and he had a great career. In fact, played a little bit in the NHL there, but then ended up going overseas. I'm pretty sure he might still be playing. But anyway, we were all living at the time up north, like north of Syracuse. I'm trying to remember that little area we were in. But yeah, we were in a complex again, not downtown. It was a little more affordable north at the time, on our first year deals. Bunch of us living in there. And I don't know, all I can remember was obviously the culture shock and buying my first vehicle down there at a dealership, and just kind of learning how things function, and what the dynamic was like being a pro player, and having to cook your own meals, and understand what taxes were. Again, sounds silly, but when you're, starting to make money and you're 20 years old, 19, whatever it was, it's a wake up call. So I think, yeah, no, I think that first year, that was me kind of figuring my way, and rather finding my way. And then of course, the toughness in the AHL, I think for me at the time, especially that was a big surprise. I mean, every team had a bunch of tough guys. I was more of a physical defenseman that tried to move the puck and skate once in a while. I wasn't a tough guy, but I got a crash course in it. And that was sort of what it was like at that time. And I think, for me at least, did wonders in my game, understanding the dynamic on the ice and how to carry yourself off the ice, preparation for games. We had a great strength coach in Mark Powell. I don't even know if Mark
Mark is
still work.
still here. Yeah, he's
Yeah, like
still
that guy.
around.
I got to give him his due. I mean, what a legend. And I mean, understood how to deal with players so well. And of course, myself being a bit of a fitness freak at the time, bouncing ideas off Mark. Love that MP is still there. What a great resource for me at the time. And Jeff Platt as well. We were both guys that took great pride in that. So it was nice to see. It's nice to hear rather that he's still there. But no, everything was great. The bus trips were awesome. Always had fun with the group. And when I look back now, I laugh. I see some of these old pictures and how baby faced I was at the time. Really, it really takes me back, but I had a blast.
Yeah, and yet a really good year too. 70 games as a rookie that year. You throw in 13 points. Team had 102 points that year, second in
Yeah.
a very, very good division. Just in terms of everything involved in that, what do you remember from that group? I guess that year you have some great names. The Mark Hardigans, so many other guys like an Andy Delmore, whoever else you want to mention. But just in terms of the success of that team, I guess when you're jumping into pro hockey and you're on a really good team right away.
Oh, it's funny. You just started name dropping some of those players and you forget, right? Like, especially in the American leagues, the guys just seemingly come and go, and you get these snapshots. And unless I have a list of all the names in
Yeah.
front of me, it's hard to remember them all. But yeah, you mentioned Mark Hardigan, another good leader that we had on that team. I mentioned Jamie Pusher. I think there was also a defenseman, McMillan, a big D-man we had at the time that had been around the league. Andy Delmore was another player. All had quirky personalities in their own right. But that's, again, it just made it fun. And as a young guy, you're just trying to fit in with the group. You're trying to get involved in conversations, but you have absolutely nothing in relation to them. A lot of these guys had families at the time, and of course, I didn't. But I think you said it right there. And that's, I think, a large part in why we had such a successful team there for a couple of years. And I don't mean winning championships, but I think for fans, it's more than that. It's just being on a winning team and giving them something to cheer for every night, right? And the end game obviously is to win, but you want to be a competitive product. And I think and we delivered that. We had that for them. And I think a large part of that was good drafting by Columbus. So we had some pretty good prospects in the pipeline. But on the other hand, that only works if you've got good veterans. So we had a lot of great vets at the time as well. Some vets, maybe the odd one here and there that I didn't care for as much, but I usually would handle that myself in practice. But no, I mean, it's, again, nothing but great memories playing around that group.
Yeah, you mentioned Jamie Pusher a couple times. Of course,
Yeah.
with the Crunch currently with the Lightning, he's a big part of the Lightning front office and their management staff. How would you
He was
describe
huge.
Jamie? Yeah, how would you describe Jamie then? And I guess to see him in management today is probably not a surprise.
Yeah. I mean, I hope he hears this because I mean every word. I mean, one of the better leaders I've ever played for at any level, NHL, AHL. Obviously, he played a ton in the NHL, but I can remember him taking us out. We were relatively new on the back end. We had a couple new faces, and he took us out to some random bar downtown after a practice. And we weren't like drinking beers all day, but we had a couple there sitting down for lunch, and it was just a great bonding moment for me. I thought that was the coolest thing. I mean, most people, most players, well into their veteran years probably wouldn't have thought much of that, but a player like me, it meant a lot. I mean, I remember I had a cider beer. It was a woodchuck, I believe. I can't believe I remember that. But that just goes to show you how impactful it was for me. And just hearing him talk and speak and tell stories and talk about the dynamic of playing pro. And it was light conversation. I can remember sitting up at the bar with the guys, and yeah, we had a blast. And that was just the kind of guy he was. And um, you know, never seemed to get too emotional. I mean, he was always very level-headed, very well-spoken, soft-spoken when he needed to be. And that was a great way to deliver messaging, to the younger players like myself. We were very receptive to that. So, and then of course, just seeing him lead by example on the ice. I mean, at the time, I don't know, he might have been 38, 36. I can't remember how old he would have been in his later years in Syracuse, but he'd have to fight once in a while. And I can only remember thinking, like, why is he doing this? But it just spoke to his leadership qualities and how much he cared about the group. And I can't say enough about him. I was never able to keep much in touch with him. But I guess regrettably I would say that, but I think he has no idea, but he was very impactful for me, at least, as far as my career went.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear, and hopefully he does hear this. We'll see if he does
Yeah.
or not. But all right, so that's year one for you. Year two, you come back, second year pro. You split some time both in Syracuse and a couple of handful of games, 20 games in the NHL for
Yeah.
Columbus as well. Your first crack in the National Hockey League. What do you remember from year two after you get that first year experience, you learn from it, and you grow some more in year two?
Yeah. Year two came very, it came a lot easier to me. I think that's when I kind of started realizing, okay, I think I could make my way up to the big team. I think that's when that goal became more realistic. Just with the way the play was going, everything was flowing a lot better in games. I had much more confidence carrying the puck, which wasn't even really ever a part of my game. But the fact that I was doing that at that level kind of indicated to me that I was an NHL player, and that was my goal then and there. And then I believe those 20 games came consecutively toward the end of the season. So I spent a lot of time in the hotel in Columbus, which wasn't very pleasant at the time. I think we were staying at like the Delta, which was an abomination when I look back now and the amount of time I had to spend in that hotel. I probably should have grown a pair and said something to the team at the time, but that's another conversation. But I had a great time, and it was great for my development. But I know that that's when things started shifting, and then the third year came around. Um, Third year comes around, and I think at that point I wanted no part of playing in the American League. Granted, I enjoyed playing there
Yeah,
when I was sent down, but really I think then and there that's when I knew, okay, it's time to make the jump. But I struggled with that. I think in my case, it was an issue where I was probably respecting my opponents too much at the NHL level when I was called up, where I probably could have been a little bit more aggressive and meaner, whatever the Columbus expected from me. Um, and so, and that was a weird time too. I think my time in Columbus was where the NHL was starting to shift away from those one-dimensional tough guys. So you had more of a hybrid version of a defenseman or a forward where fighting wasn't really the all end all anymore, but they still the old guys running the team still kind of expected it. And I wasn't afraid of doing it. I had a bunch in the NHL. I had a bunch in the American League. I wasn't doing it all the time, but that was, I think, for me, a big roadblock making my permanent step. If I were to just go up there and start scrapping with everybody, I probably would have had I probably would have been a more permanent fixture, but I refused to do that. That wasn't my game. And luckily, whenever I did get sent down, I think at the time in my third season, Ross Yates was the head coach. Trent Cull was our D coach,
yeah.
and I had nothing but respect for them. They were fantastic with me. I think as a veteran trying to make your mark at the NHL level, you will butt heads occasionally when things are going well at the American League level, which would happen sometimes. But they were patient with me and they did everything they could to prepare me to make that jump. And then eventually, that following season, I finally did. So, again, playing in Syracuse was instrumental for me in my development, and I'm very grateful. Not only the ownership group, but also the fan base. I mean, they were so much fun to play in front of, and I got to credit them. That they kept me motivated every night we were playing in those home games.
Yeah, you say that third year you didn't really want to be in Syracuse or in the AHL, which is understandable. I mean, it happens,
Yeah,
every player goes through that at some point. Again, that
yeah,
team was really good though.
we were
By
good.
the end of it,
Yeah,
and
we were a good team.
you ripped off, 23 game point streak at the end of the year to finish second place in the division. You have
Oh
an
yeah. Can I
awesome,
can I
yeah,
touch on that point
yeah,
streak?
go for it. I mean, it
So
was
so
crazy.
that's when we had Zenon. That
Yep.
was peak Zenon Konopka. And I can still remember, I'm sure you've heard this story, the chisel and the hammer, and how when we had to get those points, I don't know how many points we needed. We needed over 21 points or whatever it was in the last X amount of games to get into the dance. And I think a lot of that was because we were missing a lot of key guys here and there throughout the season due to call-ups and injuries. So we were always kind of missing a couple key players. But Zenon had it in his mind that he would grab a chisel and a hammer and he would indicate. So for the player of the game, someone who had a great game, you would designate them usually with a hard hat or something. Well, in this case, when I was playing there in my third year, Z decided, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give the player of the game the chisel and the hammer, and he's going to chisel into the concrete wall in behind the stall, number 20, and it would count down to one or whatever it was. And of course, our equipment manager at the time, poor Rodney, just objected to this idea. But Z, or Zenon being Zenon, decided we were going to do it anyway. And anyway, so this was a thing that was happening. They got into it. I pretty sure Zenon held Rodney up against the wall, against his better will, and let him know that this was happening, whether he wanted it to happen or not. But you know what? Again, it's easy stonework at the end of the season, and it motivated us to no end to play well and win those games. It sounds ridiculous, but that's just one of the things that he brought to this group. And I'm talking about, of course, Konopka at the time. So, not everybody was on board with it. Certainly not our staff, but they came around eventually and they got on board because they had to. And that was just one example of some of the insanity that we dealt with throughout those years there in Syracuse. And I think it just made it so much better, and it makes for great stories.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And Jim Sorosi talks about that one all the time, and that stretch run, and just the headaches it caused, of course, with the Chisel, but how fun it was. And then you have a great playoff series too with Manitoba. So many overtime games. It ends up being a game winner here in Game 6 to close it out. What do you remember from, I guess, that playoff run from that group?
Again, we're so lucky because we're paired up against Manitoba, another team that drew great crowds. So we're floating between two great locations, between Syracuse and obviously Winnipeg, to play against the Moose at the time. And they had a good team. I mean, Mike Keene was their head coach, and he'd played in the NHL forever. And they had a couple other players that ended up graduating on afterward. I believe Bieksa was on that team too. I could be wrong with that guy, but Kevin might have been there the year before. But in any case, there were always great players to play against. And just floating, for people that aren't aware of the setup in Winnipeg, we'd be staying at a hotel there, and it was so bloody cold. They'd have an underground walkway where you could walk through this long maze of an underground, walkway to get to the rink. Very heated rounds. I believe at one point during the rounds, during that specific round, I think Morasti printed out a picture, or someone printed out a picture of an opponent.
I think there was a newspaper or something. Yeah,
because Labrie had been talking shit in the media about our group, and then we had caught him red-handed for it. I think they went on the ice and taped it to the glass, but right at center ice during the warm-ups, something like that. I might be butchering the story a little bit, but it was wild, and that was locker room material for us as far as getting us motivated for that round. And it was electric. A lot of physicality, the odd scrap, lots of goals. You mentioned there, Lukas, with the overtime. It was great hockey. I loved it. And then I believe we ended up playing Toronto after that round. We lost to Toronto, and we put up a pretty good fight against them too. So, in the end, playing postseason hockey in the American League is a grind. You're not compensated for it at all. There's no real reason to do it other than back your crowd up. You know that they're all in on it. So that's really the only motivating factor. And of course, more exposure as a player. But we had a blast playing in those rounds. It was so much fun. And again, I go back to what I said earlier. We credit a lot of that stuff comes from playing in front of that Syracuse Crunch fan base and playing in front of those fans. They were nuts, and we fed off that energy.
Mark, this has flown right by. We're basically out of time here, so I'll guess I'll just leave it one last. If any final thoughts you want to bring up, anything you want to mention before we let you.
Yeah, well, I mean, great. So again, fans, Jim Sorosi, he was awesome. Between our coaching staff, again, Gary Agnew was my first head coach there at the pro level. I got to give him a lot of props. He was awesome. Ross Yates, Trent Cull, and of course Howard and the ownership group. I think for us at the time, they were great, and they were always willing to accommodate any wild, outlandish requests that maybe we had at the time. Maybe Syracuse bylaw for putting a boot on my Trailblazer when I parked in front of the rink. I do not thank them for that. That cost me a lot of money at the time. That was during a snowstorm, of course. So stupid me for parking in front of the rink along with, I think they had about 5 or 6 boots on our wheels, lined up between all the vehicles that
just
parked
nailed
there.
you all at once.
Yeah, we got hit pretty hard, but I between, the post-game winning, going and celebrating, having a couple beers at Dinosaur Barbecue or wherever else we ended up in that downtown area, I've got nothing but fond memories playing Call of Duty with the guys, online after practices, all that stuff. I mean, I've got nothing but great memories. I can say that wholeheartedly. I know a lot of guys that do play in the NHL sometimes didn't necessarily enjoy their time in the American League. If I could do it over again and make the same money I did at the NHL level, but stay in Syracuse, there'd be an argument there. So, huge shout out to them. Love my time down there. Nothing but good memories.
Well, awesome. We appreciate the kind words, of course, and thank you for doing this here today, Marc Methot, former Crunch defenseman, 3 years here with the Crunch. Thanks again, and continue success there, doing what you're doing as a hockey parent right now, and on the broadcast side as well.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Lukas.